My inheritance was a garage full of garbage, until I looked closer. My dad always said that you can tell everything about a person by looking at their truck. Not the year, not the color, the dust. He meant the kind of dust that comes from actual work, not from sitting in a garage pretending to be a collector's item. So when I pulled my 2004 F-150 into the circular driveway of my father's estate that Tuesday afternoon, I knew exactly what kind of statement I was making. My truck looked like it had driven through a sandstorm, which it had. I come straight from a job site in Henderson, 3 hours of desert highway with the windows cracked because the AC gave up the ghost 2 summers ago. The contrast hit me before I even killed the engine. Parked in a neat semicircle around the fountain were 5 cars that looked like they'd been delivered that morning from a luxury rental lot. 2 black Lexus sedans, a white BMW X5 with temporary plates, a Tesla that was probably in valet mode, and some Italian thing I couldn't even name, all angles and aggression. The kind of car that costs more than most people's houses. None of them had a single scratch, not one speck of dirt. My truck had a crack in the windshield from a rock that bounced up near Barstow. The passenger door didn't match the rest of the body because I'd replaced it at a junkyard after some kids sideswiped me at a 7-Eleven. The bed was full of cable spools and junction boxes, and a toolbox that weighed more than most men could lift. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the wheel. Through the tall windows of the house, I could see movement, people in black. The wake was already in full swing. My father had been dead for 3 days. I'd gotten the call Sunday morning while I was replacing a circuit breaker panel for a retired schoolteacher in North Las Vegas. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and when I saw Linda's name on the screen, I knew you develop an instinct for bad news when you hit 40. It has a specific feeling, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. She didn't cry when she told me. She just said the words in that flat tone she used when she was reading off a grocery list. Heart attack. Quick. Didn't suffer. Funeral arrangements pending. Then she hung up before I could respond. That was Linda for you. My stepmother. My father's second wife. The woman who'd married him 12 years ago when he was lonely and she was strategic. I grabbed my Carhartt jacket from behind the seat and stepped out into the October heat. Vegas in October is strange. Hot enough to make you sweat, but the sun sits at an angle that makes everything look like an oil painting. Golden light, long shadows. Pretty if you're into that sort of thing. The front door was unlocked. I walked into a wall of refrigerated air and the low murmur of people pretending to be sad. The house smelled like catered food and expensive perfume. Floral arrangements covered every flat surface, the kind that cost $300 each and would be dead by Thursday. Nobody noticed me at first. I'm good at being invisible. At 6'1" and 200 pounds of cable pulling muscle, you'd think I'd stand out, but I've got one of those faces that people's eyes just slide right past. Brown hair going gray at the temples. Work boots that don't make noise on expensive floors. The kind of guy you'd see at a hardware store and forget 5 minutes later. I recognized maybe a third of the people there. Linda's friends, mostly. Women with jewelry that caught the light like warning flares. Men in suits that probably cost what I made in a month. They held wine glasses and spoke in hushed tones about real estate values and stock portfolios and their upcoming trips to Napa. Nobody was talking about my father. I found Linda in the kitchen, directing a catering crew like a general deploying troops. She'd always been thin, but grief had sharpened her somehow, made her edges harder. She wore a black dress that probably came from a boutique where they don't put price tags on things because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. She saw me and her jaw tightened, just for a second. Then she smoothed her face into something that might pass for a pleasantry from across a room. She dismissed the caterers with a wave and turned to face me fully. The thing about Linda was that she never quite looked at you. She looked at a point just past your shoulder, like she was calculating something more important than the actual conversation. She did it now, her eyes fixed on the doorframe behind me. She got straight to business. No hello. No how was your drive. She told me the house had been sold. Closed escrow yesterday, the day after my father died. The timing wasn't a coincidence. She'd been planning this. The buyer was some tech executive from California who wanted to use it as a weekend place. Paid cash, $1.2 million. But here was the thing that made my stomach drop. The buyer demanded immediate possession. Empty delivery. Every room stripped to the studs. Professional cleaning. The place had to look like nobody had ever lived there. She'd probably traded the standard 30-day move-out period for a faster closing. Maybe got an extra $50,000 for her trouble. That was Linda's specialty. Taking shortcuts that left other people holding the bag while she cashed the check. And the deadline was tomorrow, Wednesday, 5 p.m. Everything that remained in the house after that time would be disposed of by a commercial clearing service. $3,000 for the service, which Linda made very clear she had no intention of paying. She'd send the bill to me. I opened my mouth to argue, but she wasn't done. She pulled out her phone and showed me a document. The will, my father's will, dated 6 months ago, when the dementia had already started turning his brain into Swiss cheese. When he couldn't remember my phone number but could apparently rewrite his estate planning. The house went to Linda. Naturally, the investment accounts went to Linda. The cars went to Linda. My father's entire life, liquidated and transferred to a woman who'd married him for the zip code. And me? I got the contents of the garage. Linda actually smiled when she told me that part. It was the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse. She said my father had been very specific. Michael gets everything in the garage. Every last scrap. Lucky me. She called it a junk pile. Said my father had been hoarding trash in there for 20 years, ever since she moved in and banned him from keeping his projects in the house. She tried to go in there once or twice over the years, she said, but it was too dirty. Smelled like chemicals and old paper. Made her sneeze. So she just let him have his little garbage kingdom while she focused on the parts of property that actually mattered. Old electronics, broken tools, boxes of wires and cables, and God knows what else. The kind of stuff you'd find at an estate sale where everything is priced at a quarter and still doesn't sell. She told me I had until 5 p.m. tomorrow to clear it out. Every bolt, every scrap of wire, every piece of garbage. If I didn't, she'd have the clearing service dispose of it and add the cost of my bill. She delivered this information while checking her phone, scrolling through messages with her thumb, not even pretending to care about my reaction. That's when Brenton walked in. Brent, Linda's son from her first marriage. 24 years old and proof that you can coast through life on your mother's money and your own delusions. He dressed like a tech influencer. Expensive sneakers that looked like science experiments. Ripped jeans that cost more than my truck payment. Some kind of athletic shirt with a logo I didn't recognize. He had his phone up before he even said a word. Recording. He did this thing where he narrated his life like he was hosting a reality show. He walked into the kitchen, saw me standing there in my work clothes, and started talking his phone like I wasn't a real person. Just content. Just another clip for whatever social media platform was paying him this week. He made a show of pointing his camera down at my boots. At the dried mud and cable dust, I tracked across Linda's pristine white tile. Then he panned up slowly, like he was documenting evidence at a crime scene. My worn jeans. My Carhartt jacket with the company logo patched on the chest. My hands with their permanent stains from years of pulling wire through conduit. He said something about our millionaire arriving in his luxury vehicle. Made exaggerated sniffing sounds for his audience. Talk about the smell of honest work at a country club funeral. Like it was a punchline to a joke only his followers would understand. His followers probably loved it. I'd seen his account once, when my father showed it to me with the kind of embarrassed pride that parents feel when their kids are successful at something they don't understand. 200,000 followers. Videos about cryptocurrency and side hustles, and getting rich without working. The kind of content that makes you dumber for having watched it. I didn't react. Didn't give him the satisfaction. Just stood there like a boulder while he circled me with his phone, providing commentary for an audience of strangers who forget about this video before they finish their morning coffee. Linda finally told him to stop, not because she cared about my dignity, but because she wanted to get back to business. She had people arriving, important people. The kind of people who wrote checks to charities and expected their names on plaques. She handed me a key ring, 2 keys, one for the side door of the garage, one for the padlock on the main door. She told me to take my inheritance and be gone before the morning. She didn't want to see my truck in the driveway when the Real guests arrived, the ones who mattered. I took the keys. They were warm from her hand, small and brass and heavier than they should have been. Something my father used to say came back to me in that moment. He'd said it 100 times over the years, usually when I was young and angry about something, some injustice at school or work or life in general. He'd put his hand on my shoulder and quote Marcus Aurelius. The thing about anger being acid, how it destroys the vessel that contains it more than anything it gets poured on. I'd always thought it was corny when he said it. Old man wisdom that sounded profound but didn't actually help when you wanted to hit something. But standing there in that kitchen, with Linda's face showing nothing but cold calculation and Brent's phone still recording even though she'd told him to stop, I finally understood what my father meant. I could feel the anger rising in my chest like steam in a boiler, hot and pressurized and looking for a release valve. I wanted to tell Linda exactly what kind of person she was. I wanted to explain to Brent that respect isn't something you perform for a camera. I wanted to flip that granite countertop and watch those expensive wine glasses explode against tile. But I didn't do any of that. I closed my hand around the keys, felt the metal bite into my palm, took a breath that went all the way down to my boots, and I walked out of that kitchen without saying a single word. Behind me, I heard Brent laugh, heard him tell his phone that I'd run away like a scared dog, heard Linda say something about the garage being my problem now. Their voices faded as I walked through the house, past the clusters of people who didn't know my father, out the front door into the golden October light. My truck was still there in the driveway, looking more out of place than ever among all that German engineering and leather interiors. I walked past it, down the side path where the landscaping gave way to bare dirt and desert plants that didn't need watering. The garage sat at the back of the property, detached from the main house. It had been my father's domain back when he was healthy, his workshop, his sanctuary, the place where he could think and build and exist without Linda's disapproval hovering over him like smog. I hadn't been inside it in years. Linda had made it clear early in her marriage that some spaces were off-limits to her. Too dirty, too cluttered, too much like actual work. So my father had retreated there, spent his weekends and evenings surrounded by whatever he'd been collecting. The side door was painted the same desert beige as the house, weathered, cracked in places where the sun had baked it for 2 decades. I could see my reflection in the small window, warped and ghost-like. I pulled out the key ring, selected the smaller of the 2 keys. The brass had tarnished to a dull brown. Someone had scratched a small X into the bow at some point. My father's mark. He'd done that to all his important keys, so he could identify them by touch in the dark. My hand was shaking. I didn't realize it until I tried to fit the key into the lock and missed. Had to steady my wrist with my other hand. Try again. The key slid home. I felt the pins align inside the mechanism. Felt that moment of resistance before the lock surrenders. I stood there with my hand on the key, not turning it yet, just breathing, listening to the desert silence, the distant hum of the highway, the clicking of the cooling metal on my truck. Whatever was behind this door was mine now, my inheritance. My father's final message delivered through Linda's contempt and Brent's mockery. A garage full of junk that I had 24 hours to clear out before it became someone else's problem. I thought about the life my father had built, the things he'd valued, the lessons he'd tried to teach me about patience and craftsmanship, and seeing value where other people saw trash. I turned the key. The lock clicked open, loud in the quiet, final as a coffin lid. I pulled the key out and wrapped my fingers around the doorknob. Cold metal, smooth from years of use. I could feel my pulse in my thumb. I took one more breath, pushed the door open, and stepped into my inheritance. The air inside hit me first, thick and stale, like opening a time capsule that nobody had bothered to preserve properly. It smelled the way my father always smelled when he came in from his workshop. Dust, old paper, That distinctive sweet sharp scent of rosin flux from decades of soldering. Underneath it all was something else. Machine oil, aged wood, the ghost of cigarette smoke from back when he still smoked, before Linda made him quit. I stood in the doorway and let my eyes adjust. The single window on the far wall was covered with years of grime, filtering the afternoon sun into a dim amber glow that made everything look ancient, like I was standing at the entrance to a pharaoh's tomb instead of a two-car garage in suburban Las Vegas. The space was packed, floor to ceiling, wall to wall, not hoarder-style chaos, but organized in that specific way that men of my father's generation organized things. Everything had a place. Everything had a purpose. It just looked like absolute garbage if you didn't know what you were looking at. Military surplus shelving lined both walls. The kind of heavy steel racks you see in old factory warehouses. Each shelf was loaded with boxes. Cardboard boxes with handwritten labels in my father's engineering-precise block letters. Wooden crates with rope handles. Plastic bins from hardware stores that didn't exist anymore. And everywhere, spilling out from behind the larger containers, were bundles of wire and cable wrapped with electrical tape and twist ties. I pulled my phone from my pocket to check the time. 3:45. Less than 26 hours before Linda's deadline. Before everything in this garage either came with me or went to a landfill. I did the math in my head. Even if I worked straight through the night, there was no way I could move all of this alone. Not without help. Not without a bigger truck. Maybe a trailer. The smart move would have been to walk away. Let Linda deal with her own mess. Let her pay the $3,000 to have someone haul it all to the dump. She'd burned through my father's money for 12 years. Let her spend a little more cleaning up after him. But I couldn't do it. Not because I care about the stuff. I didn't even know what most of it was yet. I couldn't do it because this was the last thing my father had left me. The only thing Linda hadn't managed to liquidate or sell or transfer into her own name. Walking away felt like abandoning him a second time. So I stepped inside and pulled the door closed behind me. The latch clicked. The sound echoed in enclosed space like a gunshot. I started with the nearest shelf, pulled down a cardboard box that was lighter than it looked, opened the top flaps. Inside were dozens of small cardboard sleeves, the kind that spare parts used to come in before everything went plastic. Each one had a faded label. Resistors, capacitors, vacuum tubes with designations I half recognized from my training. I set that box aside and reached for the next one. Heavier. I had to use both hands to lift it down. When I set it on the concrete floor, dust puffed up around the edges. This one was filled with old magazines, popular electronics, Radiocraft, issues from the 50s and 60s, their covers yellowed and brittle. Third box, technical manuals, schematics, fold-out diagrams for equipment I'd never heard of. I worked my way down the shelf systematically. Every box told the same story. My father had been collecting this stuff for decades. Hoarding it, Linda would say, but there was too much intention here for it to be hoarding. This wasn't random accumulation. This was curation. He'd been saving specific things, looking for specific pieces. The question was why. I was maybe 20 minutes into the inventory when I noticed something that made me stop. One of the boxes near the back of the middle shelf wasn't cardboard. It was wood, solid wood, with rope handles on both ends and metal corners. Military surplus. The kind of crate that ammunition used to come in during World War II in Korea. I pulled it out. The thing weighed at least 50 pounds. Had to brace my legs and use my back to get it off the shelf without dropping it. When I set it down, the whole floor seemed to shake. The top was fastened with a simple hasp and a padlock that had long since rusted through. I twisted the lock, and it came apart in my hand. The lid opened with a creak that sounded like a coffin in a horror movie. Inside was industrial packing material. Excelsior, the shredded wood fiber they used to use before bubble wrap and foam. I pushed it aside carefully, half expecting to find actual ammunition, or bombs, or whatever the military had originally stored in here. What I found instead were transformers, not the plastic wall warts you plug into an outlet. These were old school, wrapped in layers of brown paper and tar, each one the size of a brick and twice as heavy. I lifted one out and looked at the stampings on the metal housing. Western Electric, a logo I recognized, a name that meant something. I set it down and pulled out my phone. 30 seconds of searching told me what I was holding. These weren't just old transformers. These were output transformers from telephone company equipment, the kind that audiophiles paid stupid money for because they were supposedly made better than anything modern manufacturers could produce. I looked at the crate, counted. There were at least 20 of them in there, maybe more underneath. My heart started beating faster. I moved to the next crate. Same size, same weight, same military surplus construction. This one opened easier. Inside were more transformers, but different, bigger. Power supply units with ceramic insulators and copper windings, so thick they looked like modern art. Third crate. I already knew what I was going to find before I opened it. More Western Electric, more telephone company surplus. But these weren't transformers. These were complete units. Amplifiers, preamps, equipment so old it didn't even have transistors. Just tubes and iron and copper wound by hand in factories that closed down when Eisenhower was president. I pulled one out, brushed off the dust. Read the plate on the front. Western Electric 91A. The designation meant nothing to me, but I'd been in enough audiophile forums and vintage equipment threads to know that Western Electric meant money. Real money. The kind of money that made grown men bid against each other on eBay like they were fighting over the last helicopter out of Saigon. I took pictures, looked them up, found auction listings, found sales records, found forum posts from collectors who talked about these things the way other people talked about classic cars or rare wines. One unit, one single 91A amplifier in working condition, $50,000. Maybe 80 if it had all the original components. I had 3 in this crate alone. My hands were shaking when I set my phone down. I looked around the garage with different eyes now. All these boxes, all these crates. If my father had collected this much Western Electric equipment, what else was in here? I started moving faster, opening crates, cataloging contents, taking pictures. Every single container held something valuable. Tubes in original packaging from the 1950s, $3,000 each. Cables with cloth insulation and hand-soldered connectors. Rare, collectible, worth more per foot than most people's car payments. The man had built a fortune out of obsolete telephone company surplus and hidden it in a garage that smelled like old newspapers and solder flux. I sat down on one of the crates and laughed. Couldn't help it. The sound came out harsh and slightly unhinged, echoing off the metal shelving. Linda thought this was trash. Garbage she was doing me a favor by letting me haul away. She'd tried to come in here once or twice, she said. Too dirty. Smelled like chemicals. Made her sneeze. She'd been standing 3 feet away from millions of dollars, and all she saw was dirt. My father had known exactly what he was doing. Linda liked shiny things. New things, status symbols she could show off to her friends at the country club. So he'd invested in the opposite. Heavy, dirty, obsolete equipment that looked like it belonged in a scrapyard. Hid it in military crates and industrial packaging. Stored in the one place she'd never go because it was beneath her standards. It was brilliant. It was patient. It was the most elaborate retirement plan I'd ever seen. And he'd left it all to me, not with a note, not with an explanation, just with a line in a will that said I got the contents of the garage. Everything inside these walls, every tube, every transformer, every piece of gear that Linda would burn before she'd admit had any value. I was still sitting there, trying to process the magnitude of what I found, when I heard footsteps outside, the crunch of expensive sneakers on gravel. The side door opened and Brent walked in. He had his phone out, of course. Recording. Always recording. Building his brand, or whatever he called it. He panned the camera around the garage, narrating for his followers about how sad it was that old people collected junk instead of investing in crypto or NFTs, or whatever scam he was promoting that week. He wasn't looking where he was walking. too busy performing for an audience that wasn't even in the room. He wandered toward the center of the garage, still talking to his phone, and his foot connected with one of the crates I'd pulled down. The sound was beautiful. A solid thunk of Italian leather meeting military-grade pine and 40 pounds of transformer iron, the kind of impact that travels up your leg and into your spine and makes your teeth hurt. Brent made a noise that probably got bleeped out in the final edit. He dropped his phone, grabbed his foot, started hopping around on one leg like he'd just stepped on a landmine. He wanted to know what the hell was in these boxes. Why was this garbage so heavy? Who stores trash in wooden crates that weigh more than a person? He was still hopping, still holding his foot. His phone was on the concrete floor, screen cracked, filming the ceiling. I stood up slowly, kept my face neutral, concerned, even, like I was genuinely worried about his injury, and not suppressing the urge to laugh until my ribs cracked. I told him they were old transformers, electronic equipment my father had salvaged from job sites over the years. Scrap metal, basically, worth maybe pennies on the pound if you could find a recycler who'd take them. Most places didn't even want them anymore because of environmental regulations about the materials inside. Brent stopped hopping, looked at me like I just confirmed everything he already believed about my father, about me, about people who work with their hands instead of their phones. He said I was welcome to them. Said he couldn't believe I'd driven all the way from Henderson to claim a bunch of junk that probably wasn't even worth the gas money. Said my father had clearly lost his mind in those final years, squirreling away garbage while Linda tried to maintain some dignity in the house. I nodded along, agreed that it was a shame, agreed that the old man had been stubborn about letting go of things, agreed that this was probably a waste of my time, but I'd made a promise to myself to at least look through it all before the clearing service came tomorrow. Brent picked up his phone, checked the crack screen, swore again, told me this whole place gave him the creeps, and he was going back to the house where it didn't smell like a dead person's hobby. He limped out, left the door open. I watched him go, watched him favor his right foot all the way up the path toward the main house, watched until he disappeared around the corner, and I was alone again with my inheritance. I turned back to the crates, ran my hand over the rough wood, felt the weight of what my father had done, the patience it must have taken, the knowledge required to know what was valuable and what was actually trash, the faith that someday someone would see it for what it was. I pulled out my phone and did more research, found collector groups, found auction houses that specialize in vintage audio equipment, found shipping companies that handled this kind of cargo, found insurance brokers who could tell me what it would cost to protect this much value. The numbers kept getting bigger. Every search result, every completed listing, every forum post from collectors who talked about finding even one of these units like they discovered the Holy Grail. Conservative estimate, if everything in this garage was in working condition, I was looking at 7 figures. Maybe low 7 figures. Maybe more if the right buyers got into a bidding war. Linda had sold the house for $1.2 million and thought she'd won. She'd probably cleared less than $100,000 after the mortgage and the closing costs and the loans I was sure she'd taken out against the property. Meanwhile, she'd just signed over a fortune to me out of pure contempt. I needed to move fast. I needed to get everything out before she had time to think, before Brent posted something online that made the wrong person curious, before anyone realized that the dusty junk in this garage was actually a retirement fund with vacuum tubes. But I couldn't do it alone, not in 24 hours, not without help. And I couldn't rent a moving truck or hire a crew without leaving a paper trail that Linda might see. She was vindictive enough to try to contest the will if she found out what she'd given away. No, I needed her cooperation, needed her to help me move it, needed her to sign something that made it clear she was voluntarily giving up any claim to this property. I needed her to think she was winning. I stood there in the dim light of my father's workshop and thought about poker, about tells, about the way you can convince someone you're bluffing by acting exactly like you're bluffing, by being so obvious about your weakness that they can't imagine you're actually holding a straight flush. I looked around the garage one more time, at the fortune hidden in plain sight, at the legacy my father had left me wrapped in dust and military surplus packaging. Then I did what any good poker player does when they're holding the nuts. I put on my most desperate, defeated face and walked back toward the house to ask Linda for help. My shoulders slumped, my head down, every line of my body language screaming that I just realized I was in over my head and needed to negotiate my way out of an impossible situation. Behind me, the garage door swung shut in the October breeze. Inside, in the darkness, several $1 million worth of vintage audio equipment sat in boxes that looked like trash, and I was going to make Linda pay me to take it away. I found Linda in the kitchen again, directing the caterers like nothing had changed in the past hour, like her husband hadn't just been buried, like the house wasn't being stripped and sold to strangers. She was holding a wine glass and pointing at platters, rearranging the presentation of food that nobody was eating. I stood in the doorway and waited, let my shoulders stay slumped, let my face show exactly how overwhelmed I felt. Wasn't hard. Part of me genuinely felt that way. The other part was doing calculations, running scenarios, planning 3 moves ahead like my father taught me to do when he showed me how to play chess in the same kitchen 25 years ago. Linda finally noticed me. Her eyes went to my dusty clothes, then to my face, then back to the caterers like I was an interruption she'd have to deal with before getting back to important things. I asked if I could get some water, said the garage was worse than I thought. Said I needed to talk to her about the situation because I didn't see how I could make her deadline work. She told the caterers to take 5. Waited until they filed out of the kitchen. Then she turned to me with that expression she wore when she was about to explain something to someone she considered stupid. Patient, condescending, like talking to a child who couldn't grasp basic concepts. I filled a glass from the tap, drank it, filled it again, let the silence stretch. Let her get impatient. When I finally spoke, I made sure my voice had that defeated edge, the sound of a man who just realized he was beaten. I told her it was impossible. The garage was packed with heavy equipment, old transformers, steel shelving, wooden crates that weighed more than I could lift alone. I'd need to rent a truck with a liftgate, hire at least 2 guys to help with the loading, get proper tie-downs and blankets, so nothing shifted during transport. We were talking $1,000 minimum, maybe $1,500 if I couldn't find anyone willing to work on short notice. And I didn't have that kind of cash just sitting around. My business account was tight. Payroll was due Friday. I had invoices out, but nothing had cleared yet. The timing was just wrong. I said maybe the easiest thing was to let the new owners deal with it. Let them call the clearing service. Let them pay for disposal. It wasn't my problem anymore. I'd tried. I'd come out here. I'd looked at what needed to be done. Sometimes you just have to walk away from a bad situation. Linda's face changed. Not much. Just a tightening around the eyes. A tension in her jaw. She set down her wine glass carefully. Too carefully. She asked if I understood what would happen if the garage wasn't empty by 5 p.m. tomorrow. Said the buyers had been very clear. Empty delivery. Professional cleaning. Not a single item left behind. If they walked through and found so much as a screwdriver in that space, they could walk away from the entire deal. $1.2 million. Gone. Because of my father's junk collection. Because I couldn't be bothered to handle my responsibilities. I shrugged. Said she was the one who inherited the house. Said she was the one who signed a contract with impossible conditions. I'd inherited the contents of the garage, sure, but nobody said I had to move them on her timeline. I could take my time, sort through everything at my own pace. Maybe come back next weekend with a bigger truck. The color rose in Linda's face. She asked if I was seriously going to sabotage a $1 million real estate transaction over a garage full of trash. Asked if I was really that petty. That vindictive, that much like my father with his stubborn refusal to let go of things that had no value. I didn't answer, just stood there drinking my water and looking tired, looking like a man who'd driven 3 hours after working a 10-hour shift and was now being asked to perform miracles with no resources and no time. Linda opened her purse, one of those designer bags that cost more than my monthly mortgage. She pulled out a wallet, not a regular wallet, the kind with a money clip. She counted out bills. Hundreds. 10 of them. Laid them on the granite counter between us like she was playing poker and had just called my bluff. She said here was $1,000. Cash. More than enough to rent whatever I needed and hire whoever I needed. But I had to take everything. Every box. Every cable. Every piece of scrap metal. The garage had to be empty enough to echo when the buyers walked through tomorrow afternoon. And I had to sign something. A release. A waiver. Whatever you called it. Something that said I was taking this stuff voluntarily and wouldn't come back later claiming I'd been forced to remove valuable property under duress. She wanted it in writing that I acknowledged this was all worthless junk and I was doing her a favor by hauling it away. I pretended to think about it, looked at the money, looked at Linda, let the moment stretch until it was almost uncomfortable. Then I said I needed to write something up, something simple that protected both of us. Made sure there were no misunderstandings down the road. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. Started typing with my thumbs while Linda watched. Kept my face serious. Concentrated, like I was crafting a legal document instead of setting a trap. I read it out loud as I typed. Said the parties agreed that Mike was removing the contents of the garage as construction debris and scrap materials. That Linda and her son Brenton were relinquishing all property claims to the items contained in said garage, that everything was being taken as is, with no warranties or guarantees about condition or value. Standard quitclaim language, the kind of thing you'd see on any property transfer. I asked if she wanted me to print it out or if a text version would work. Said I could email it to her if she had a printer. Linda made an impatient noise. Said she didn't need a printed contract for garbage removal. Said we were both adults and could handle a simple agreement without lawyers and notaries and all the bureaucratic nonsense my father always insisted on. That's when Brent limped back into the kitchen, still favoring his right foot, still holding his phone. He looked at the money on the counter, looked at me, asked what he'd missed. Linda explained. Said I was being difficult about moving my inheritance. Said she was giving me $1,000 to make the problem go away. Said I wanted some kind of signed agreement, like she was trying to cheat me out of something valuable, instead of doing me a favor by paying me to take trash. Brent laughed. Actually laughed out loud. Said I was asking for a receipt for garbage. Said that was the most pathetic thing he'd seen all week. Said his followers would love this. The guy who needed legal protection for his junk collection. He pulled up the note on my phone screen. Read it out loud in a mocking voice. Pause at the word quitclaim, like it was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. He asked Linda if she was really going to sign this. Said it was insulting. Said I was treating her like a criminal instead of like family. Linda waved him off. Said it didn't matter. Said the contents of the garage were worthless, and if it made me feel better to have something in writing, she'd humor me. She was too busy to argue about nothing. The wake was still going on. She had guests to attend to. She just wanted this resolved so she could focus on important things. She took my phone, used her finger to sign at the bottom of the note. The signature came out shaky and illegible. Didn't matter. It was legally binding. Digital signatures have been valid in Nevada for years. She handed the phone to Brent, told him to sign too, said his name was mentioned in the agreement, so he needed to acknowledge it. Brent signed, made a show of it, added a smiley face next to his name, handed the phone back to me and said I should frame it, put it on my wall, show my grandkids the day I got a receipt for garbage. I saved the note, screenshotted it for backup, emailed it to myself and to my business account and to my personal cloud storage. Brent watched me do all of this and laugh harder. Said I was treating this like a real estate closing instead of a trash pickup. Linda pushed a stack of hundreds across the counter, told me to get started, said she expected updates, said if I ran into problems, I should figure them out myself because she wasn't going to hold my hand through basic manual labor. I took the money, folded it, put it in my wallet, thanked her for being reasonable, said I'd have everything cleared out by tomorrow afternoon, said she wouldn't even know I'd been there. I walked back out to my truck. The sun was setting now. Long shadows across the circular driveway. The rental cars were starting to leave. People who'd come to pay respects were heading back to their actual lives. By tomorrow, This would all be over. The house would be empty. Linda would have her money, and I'd have everything my father had spent 20 years collecting. I moved the F-150 around back, backed it up as close to the garage as I could get, opened the tailgate, started loading. The work was methodical, systematic, one crate at a time, one box at a time. I didn't rush, didn't cut corners. Every piece of equipment got wrapped in moving blankets I'd pulled from behind the seat. Every transformer got secured with tie-down straps. Every bundle of cable got coiled properly and stacked where it wouldn't shift. My truck had a payload capacity of about 1,500 pounds. I knew I was exceeding it, knew the suspension was compressing more than it should, knew the rear end was sitting lower than the front. Didn't matter. I wasn't going far. Just to my storage unit in Henderson, just far enough to get everything out of Linda's reach. The first load took me 2 hours to pack. I worked in the light from my phone, from the dim bulb in the garage, from the moon that had risen over the desert. My back ached. My hands were filthy. My clothes were soaked with sweat despite the October chill. I was strapping down the last crate when I heard the side door of the house open. Footsteps on gravel. Brent's voice calling out into the darkness, asking if I was still out here. I kept working. Didn't answer. Let him come find me. He appeared around the corner of the truck. Had a cigarette in one hand, phone in the other. Not recording this time. Just smoking and looking bored. He said Linda had sent him to check on my progress. Said she wanted to make sure I was actually working and not just sitting in my truck feeling sorry for myself. I told him I was making good progress. Said I'd probably need 3 or 4 trips total, but I'd have it done by noon tomorrow. Told him to tell Linda she didn't need to worry. Brent took a drag on his cigarette, looked at the loaded truck bed, asked why I was bothering with all the blankets and straps. Said it was just going to junkyard anyway. Said I was wasting time trying to protect garbage. I said old habits. Said I'd been taught to secure loads properly even if it was just brush going to the dump. Said my father drilled it into me. Do it right or don't do it at all. Brent made a dismissive sound, finished a cigarette, and dropped it on the gravel. Didn't step on it. Just let it smolder there like he'd let someone else deal with it. He was about to head back to the house when something caught his eye. A cable, one I'd missed, lying on the ground next to the garage door. Old cloth insulation, tarnished connectors on both ends. Looked like something you'd find in a dumpster behind a repair shop. He picked it up, held it between 2 fingers like it was contaminated, asked if I forgot my trash. Said I needed to take all of it, every last piece. That was the deal. He threw it at me, not handed it, threw it. The cable hit my chest, and I caught it reflexively. He said there was my garbage. Said I shouldn't forget any of it. Called me a garbage man. Said that's what I was. A garbage man hauling away garbage for garbage money. I looked at the cable in my hands. Recognized it. Western Electric KS 13385. Original telephone company installation cable from the 1940s. Cloth wrapped copper. Hand-terminated ends. Collectors paid $500 a foot for this stuff. This piece was maybe 6 feet long. $3,000. Give or take. Brent had just thrown $3,000 at my chest and called it garbage. I smiled. Couldn't help it. Told him thanks. Said I appreciated him helping me clean up. Called him brother. Meant it in the most ironic way possible. Brent flipped me off. Walked back to the house. Left me standing there in the dark with a small fortune in my hands and a truck full of millions behind me. I made 4 trips that night. Henderson to Las Vegas to Henderson. Each time, I drove the speed limit, used my turn signals, stopped completely at stop signs. I wasn't about to get pulled over with a load worth more than most people's houses sitting unsecured in my truck bed. Each time I came back, the house was darker, fewer lights on, fewer cars in the driveway. By the final trip, it was 3 a.m. and the place was completely dark. Linda's BMW was the only car left. Even the caterers had gone home. I loaded the last of the equipment, swept the garage floor, made sure I hadn't missed anything, pulled down a few old shelving units, and stacked them in the truck bed. The garage looked bigger empty. Echoed when I walked through it. Smelled like dust and absence. I stood in the doorway one last time. This had been my father's space. His sanctuary. The place where he'd planned his revenge against a woman who'd married him for money and stayed for more money. Where he'd quietly assembled a fortune from obsolete technology and hidden it in plain sight. I pulled the door closed, locked it, dropped the keys through the mail slot in the main house. Linda had what she wanted. An empty garage, a clean closing, her $1 million payday minus whatever she'd borrowed against the property over the years. And I had what my father wanted me to have. Everything that mattered. Everything that had value to someone who knew how to look past appearances. I climbed into my truck. The suspension groaned. The whole vehicle set tilted backward like a seesaw. I turned the key. The engine caught. Reliable as always. 250,000 miles, and it still started on the first try. I pulled out of the driveway. Watched in my rear-view mirror as the automatic gates closed behind me. Those gates my father had installed. Those gates Linda had always loved because they made the house look like it belonged to important people. I turned onto the main road. Empty at 3 a.m. Nothing but streetlights and desert, and the distant glow of the strip lighting up the southern sky. I reached forward and turned on the radio. Classic rock station. Eagles. Take It Easy. Seemed appropriate. I drove toward Henderson with several $1 million in vintage audio equipment in my truck bed and a legally binding quitclaim agreement on my phone. Drove past the casinos where people bet their mortgage payments on red or black. Past the pawn shops where people traded their futures for quick cash. Past the storage facilities where people kept things they couldn't bear to throw away but didn't have room to keep. I pulled into my unit just as the sun was starting to gray the eastern sky. Unloaded everything. Stacked it carefully on pallets. Locked the unit. Drove home. Showered. Slept for 4 hours. Woke up and started making phone calls. The next 6 months were a blur of authentication, an appraisal, and auction house meetings. I documented everything. Photographed every component. Researched every serial number. Contacted collectors in Japan and Germany and Australia who specialize in Western electric equipment. Built a database of what I had and what it was worth and who might want to buy it. The numbers kept going up. Every expert I talked to said the same thing. This was the largest private collection of telephone company audio equipment they'd ever seen. The condition was remarkable. The provenance was clear. This was the kind of collection that museums fought over. Conservative estimate from 3 different auction houses. $3.2 million. Maybe more if the right buyers got into a bidding war. Maybe less if I tried to move it all at once and flooded the market. I didn't flood the market. I was patient. Sold pieces individually. Took my time. Got top dollar. Let the collectors compete. Watched the wire transfers hit my business account like slot machine payouts. I bought a commercial property in Henderson. Nothing fancy. A warehouse unit with climate control and good security. Set up a proper workshop. Installed the kind of lighting my father always wanted. Built workbenches from solid maple. Organized everything the way he'd organize his garage. Everything in its place. Everything labeled. Everything accessible. I kept some of the equipment for myself. One complete Western Electric 91A amplifier system. Restored it personally. Took my time. Did it right. Used it to build a listening room in the back of the workshop. Proper acoustics. Comfortable chairs. A turntable that cost more than my first car. I sold the F-150. Finally, bought a newer truck with working air conditioning and a suspension that wasn't permanently compressed. Kept the old one's license plate. My father had picked that number. Random combination that meant nothing to anyone else but that I'd seen in his driveway 10,000 times. It felt right to keep it. I set aside money for my kids' college funds. Both of them. Full ride to wherever they wanted to go. No loans. No debt. No working 3 jobs while trying to study. They'd have what I had to fight for. And I waited. Waited for Linda to figure it out. Waited for Brent to see something online. Waited for the inevitable moment when they realized what they'd signed away. It took 4 months. For months before Brent was scrolling through an auction site and saw a listing that looked familiar. A Western Electric 91A amplifier, restored condition, original transformers, estimated sale price $75,000. And in the photos, visible in the background, you could see part of a military surplus crate with my father's handwriting on it. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the workshop, testing a set of 300B tubes I'd had authenticated. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Listened to the message while I worked. Brent's voice, shaking with rage, calling me a thief, saying I'd stolen from them, saying that equipment was part of the estate, saying they were going to sue me, saying their lawyer said I'd committed fraud, saying I'd taken advantage of Linda while she was grieving, saying every court in Nevada would side with them. I saved the message, added it to my documentation folder, right next to the quitclaim agreement, right next to the video Brent had posted of himself kicking a crate of transformers, right next to screenshots of Linda's text messages where she called the garage contents worthless trash. I called him back. He answered on the first ring, started yelling immediately, said I'd tricked him, said I'd lied about what was in the garage, said no judge would let me keep stolen property. I waited until he ran out of breath. Then I spoke, kept my voice level, calm, the way my father used to sound when he was explaining something to someone who wasn't going to like the answer. I told him I had a signed agreement, his signature and Linda's signature, agreeing that they were relinquishing all claims to the contents of my father's garage, agreeing that everything was being removed as scrap and debris. Their words, their characterization, their decision. I told him I also had his video, the one where he kicked a crate worth $50,000 and called it garbage, the one where he filmed me in my work clothes and made fun of me for being a garbage man, the one where he threw a $3,000 cable at me and told me not to forget my trash. I told him I had Linda's text messages, the ones where she said the garage was full of junk, the ones where she said she tried to go in there, but it was too dirty, the ones where she said my father had lost his mind collecting worthless equipment. I told him any lawyer worth their retainer would laugh them out of the office. Any judge would look at the evidence and rule against them in about 30 seconds. They'd signed a legal document. They'd taken money. They'd voluntarily given up their claims. And they documented their own contempt for the property in multiple formats on multiple platforms. And then I told him the part that probably hurt worse than anything else. I told him Linda's $1,000 had gone to insure the first truckload, proper cargo insurance, professional coverage, the kind that protects high-value shipments. I'd use her money to protect the property she'd insisted was worthless. There was silence on the line, long enough that I thought he'd hung up. Then he asked how much. How much was it all worth? How much had I made them look like fools for? I told him that was between me and my accountant. Told him I'd paid every penny of tax I owed. Told him everything was legal and documented and above board. Told him to have a good day and ended the call. I blocked his number. Blocked Linda's number when she called 10 minutes later. Blocked every variation I could think of. Let them rage into the void. Let them hire lawyers who'd take their money and explain the concept of quitclaim agreements. Let them learn what my father had tried to teach me. That patience beats panic. That knowledge beats ignorance. That doing your homework is worth more than looking good at a funeral. I found out later what had happened to Linda. Not from her. From mutual acquaintances. From people in my father's old circles who enjoyed watching karma work. The house sale had closed. $1.2 million. But Linda had borrowed against that house for years. Home equity line of credit. The kind of loan that seems like free money until you have to pay it back. She'd maxed it out. Spent it on clothes and cars and trips and whatever else she thought she deserved for being married to my father. The bank took $1.1 million at closing. Paid off the helic. Linda walked away with $100,000. Minus realtor fees. Minus closing costs. Minus the credit card debt she'd accumulated, expecting a bigger payout. She cleared maybe $40,000. Maybe. She was renting now. A 2-bedroom apartment in a complex that didn't allow pets. Driving a used Camry. Working part-time at a real estate office. living the life she'd been terrified of living when she married my father 12 years ago. Brand had taken his inheritance, the cash my father had left him in the will, $20,000, invested it all in NFTs, digital art, cartoon apes, the kind of get-rich-quick scheme that people fall for when they're convinced they're smarter than everyone else. He'd lost it all when the market crashed. Lost it and more. He was living with Linda now, in that two-bedroom apartment, posting videos about how the system was rigged and traditional investments were for suckers. I didn't feel good about their situation. Didn't feel bad either. Just felt like watching a mathematical equation solve itself. Variables and constants. Actions and consequences. The universe balancing its books. It was a Thursday evening when I finally set up the listening room properly. Spent the whole day running speaker wire, positioning the chairs, adjusting the acoustics, making sure everything was exactly right. I pulled out my father's record collection. He'd left that to me too. Linda had thought it was worthless. More junk, more dead weight. She'd told me to take it all. Probably assumed I'd throw it away or sell at a garage sale. Original pressings, first editions, Blue Note jazz from the 50s and 60s, impulse recordings, albums that were worth hundreds each but that she'd have sold for quarters just to get them out of the house. I selected one, John Coltrane, A Love Supreme, the 1965 pressing with the original liner notes. Pulled it from its sleeve carefully, inspected the vinyl. No scratches, no warps. My father had taken care of his records the way he'd taken care of everything else that mattered to him. I set it on the turntable, adjusted the counterweight, set the needle, stepped back and pressed play. The sound that came through those Western Electric speakers wasn't like anything you'd hear from modern equipment. Wasn't cleaner or sharper or more accurate. It was warmer, fuller, more alive. The tubes added something to the signal, some quality that engineers with their frequency response charts and distortion measurements would call imperfection, but that human ears recognized as real. Coltrane's saxophone filled the room. Every breath, every vowel click, every harmonic overtone. The bass walked underneath like a heartbeat. The drums whispered and crashed. Elvin Jones playing like he was having a conversation with the divine. I sat in one of the chairs. Closed my eyes, listened to music the way my father had listened to it, the way he'd intended for it to be heard, through equipment he'd spent 20 years collecting, through speakers that were older than I was, through an amplifier that was worth enough to buy a house. I thought about the last time I'd seen him, 3 months before he died, before the dementia took too much. We'd sat in his garage, in folding chairs that were uncomfortable and wobbly, and he played me the same album on a cheap portable record player that Linda had banished from the house. He'd told me about the equipment he was collecting, told me it was for me, told me he was sorry about Linda, sorry about the way he'd been pressured to change, sorry he couldn't leave me the house or the money, but he could leave me this. He could leave me the tools to build something, the resources to start over, the knowledge that someone had been planning for my future, even when it looked like I'd been forgotten. I hadn't understood then, hadn't known what Western Electric meant, hadn't known that telephone companies' surplus was valuable, hadn't known that he was building me a fortune in military crates and cardboard boxes. But he'd known I'd figured out, known I had the patience to look past the dust and the dirt and the contempt, known I'd been paying attention all those years he taught me about research and authentication and the difference between scrap and treasure. The album finished. The needle lifted automatically, returned to its rest. The room went quiet except for the soft hum of the tube amplifier. That warm, almost imperceptible sound that told you the equipment was alive. Ready? Waiting for the next piece of music. I stood up, walked to the amplifier, ran my hand over the brushed metal faceplate, felt the warmth from the tubes. Read the nameplate. Western Electric 91A. Made in 1946. Restored in 2024. By me, by hand. The way my father would have wanted. I thought about calling him, thanking him, telling him I understood. Then I remembered he was dead, had been dead for 6 months. Was buried in a cemetery I hadn't visited since the funeral because I'd been too busy executing his revenge plot to stand at his grave and cry. But maybe that was better. Maybe he'd prefer this. Prefer knowing his son was sitting in a clean workshop, listening to Coltrane on equipment worth millions. Prefer knowing the plan had worked. Prefer knowing that Linda and Brent had signed away a fortune while calling it garbage. My phone buzzed. Text message. My daughter. Asking if I was coming to her school play next week. Asking if I could help her with her math homework over the weekend. Asking normal teenage questions that had nothing to do with estates or inheritances or vintage audio equipment. I texted back. Told her I'd be there. Told her I'd help with whatever she needed. Told her I loved her. She sent back a heart emoji. Simple, uncomplicated. The kind of love that doesn't come with conditions or calculations or schemes. I put the phone down. Selected another album. Miles Davis this time. Kinda Blue, the most famous jazz album ever recorded. The one everyone owned but nobody really listened to properly because they'd never heard it through equipment like this. I lowered the needle. Closed my eyes. Let Miles' trumpet fill the space where words couldn't reach. Let the music say what I couldn't. Thank you. I understand. I'll take care of it. I'll take care of everything. The tubes glowed in the darkness. Warm amber light. Old technology. Obsolete technology. Technology that shouldn't work better than modern equipment, but somehow did. Technology my father had known would outlast his marriage, outlast his life, outlast Linda's contempt. Outside, the sun was setting over Henderson, the desert turning gold, the mountains going purple. Another day ending in Nevada. Another day in a city built on gambling and luck, and the belief that you could beat the house if you just played the right cards. But I hadn't beaten the house, hadn't gambled, hadn't gotten lucky. I just paid attention, done my homework, recognized value where other people saw trash, exactly like my father taught me. The music played on, perfect, imperfect, real, and somewhere I hoped he was listening too.